So 21 out of the 27 books of the New Testament are letters, and they are arranged in two groups according to order of size. The first 13 are letters by Paul, with the longest first, that's Romans, followed by 1 Corinthians, which is slightly shorter. And whenever you get a pair of letters like 1 and 2 Corinthians, those are blocked together. Then we go Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians. Arguably, Galatians and Ephesians could be in a slightly different order because Ephesians can be longer than Galatians. Then shorter than Colossians is 1 Thessalonians. Shorter than it is 2 Thessalonians. Then what we go is to private letters or personal letters, 1 and 2 Timothy, Titus and Philemon, again descending in order of size. Then we go to non-Pauline letters, beginning with the longest of those, which is Hebrews. The second longest is James. Third longest is 1 Peter, with 2 Peter accompanying it. The fourth longest is 1 John, with the 2 and 3 John accompanying it, and the shortest of all is Jude. So really everything is just going in descending order of size. So Romans is the longest letter of Paul and is written to a church that Paul hasn't yet visited in Rome, and is a big treatise on the whole of the Christian message, the place of Israel in God's thinking, how we are saved from our sins. And it also ends with some more personal messages, but the substance of it is the Christian message as a whole, and how it begins with how God's anger is revealed against sin. And then what's the answer to that? It's the revealing of God's righteousness as Jesus comes and dies in the place of our sin. The first 3 chapters really have the depressing message about how every human is caught up in sin in a very full way. And then going on from there to the solution about how there is a way of getting right with God, which isn't by working on what you do, it is by trusting in what he has done. 1 Corinthians seems to be responding to some specifics that the Corinthians have asked Paul about. But before it gets onto that, it does rebuke the Corinthians for the way that they have got divided amongst themselves and have started forming groups, some saying they're following Paul, some following Peter, some following Apollos, others following Christ. And he says, look, there is only one Christ, and we need to follow him, and that the message which he has chosen to use to reach the world is the message of the cross, which really looks foolish to people who are looking for something wise, and it's a stumbling block to people who just don't like the fact that God should show his glory in such a shameful way. Then he responds to various questions they've raised about marriage and singleness, about what to do with eating and things sacrificed to idols, about how to run church services, and particularly about the subject of the special gifts that God's given for the church, miraculous gifts that God's given for the church, and then on the subject of the resurrection, where he speaks at length. So it goes with those topics. In 2 Corinthians, Paul explains why he hasn't visited the Corinthians when he said that he would. It's one of his most personal letters, very emotional letter, in which he gives an account of that. And he also explains to the Corinthians how they should be giving people, how Christ himself gave so much for us. And he also then, at the end of the letter, deals with the whole question of weakness and how we are able to work and have God's power most effective on us when we are weak. And he contrasts that with people he calls super apostles, who seem to be trying to combine the Christian message with a lifestyle of making great impression through glamour. Galatians is a pretty sharp letter. It's one letter where Paul doesn't write and commend the people he's writing to for doing things right. And he is really telling them off for abandoning the core Christian message by allowing themselves to go away from the idea that they are saved through Christ's work alone, and thinking that they need to do all sorts of aspects of the Jewish law in order to get right with God. And he says, look, you've got to understand that God's promises came first to Abraham. The law came later. So if you try and make it so that God working and saving people depends on the law, you're getting the order fundamentally wrong. God's way of working at its most fundamental is working through grace and through promise, not through people following a set of rules. And he's really criticizing those who are trying to Judaize the Christian message and say that you get saved through following those rules. Ephesians says that God has the most amazing plan, which has gone on from deep eternity and which is involving every resource in the universe in order to make Christ visibly the head of all things, and that he is adopting people as his own children into his family so that Christ can be firstborn and have the others as brothers and sisters alongside him, and that they will have full inheritance alongside him. And it also tells about how you would never have guessed, but that God has all along been planning that the Gentiles, the non-Jews, should have an equal inheritance with the Jews as they come and are adopted into the family. And this was the surprise which has been intended from eternity past, but which no one throughout the entire Old Testament period would have possibly guessed, that God was actually going to make them part of one single body with one set of promises. And that's what he's actually delivering on in the time of the New Testament. So this is an amazing surprise, how there have been barriers between Jews and Gentile, and God's broken them down because of what he's done on the cross, because his aim is to have Christ as the one head of the one body, which is the church. He then explains in the second half of the letter how practically the church needs to live, going away from evil deeds and being properly ordered in the household. So that's what Ephesians is about. Philippians is a letter which is written by Paul from prison, in which he talks about how it's wonderful that he, being in prison, is being a great opportunity for Christianity to spread. Some people are preaching for all sorts of wrong motives, but at least they're preaching the message is going out. And he appeals to the Philippians to be humble and accept the mindset that Christ had, who, though he had so much with his Father, gave that up in order to be humbled. And as a result, he is given the name above every name. Everyone will bow to him. And he tells the Philippians to accept the lordship of Christ and to rejoice and be unified together through having his attitude. Colossians, in many ways, is like a twin letter to Ephesians. It has many of the same themes, and it's trying to help the Colossians to fend off some false teaching that they've been given. They're being dragged away from the simple following of Christ to think that they need to get into philosophies and special experiences with angels and so on. And perhaps some of them are wanting to observe particular religious days and ceremonies. And what they're being told in Colossians is that really Christ has done away with that all, and that you need to accept him as the head over everything. 1 and 2 Thessalonians are letters written to a group of Christians that Paul had only spent a few weeks with in northern Greece, in Thessalonica, and he's explaining to them about how they should live, and particularly he's focusing on how Christ is going to come back. He needs to explain to them that doesn't mean you should stop working, and don't think that this is necessarily going to happen immediately, because there will be other things that have to happen first. So in 2 Thessalonians 2, he explains that there has to be a turning away that happens first, but he is preparing Christians for a lot of suffering that they will experience as they seek to follow Christ. 1 and 2 Timothy are letters written by Paul to this church leader, Timothy, who's actually seems to be in charge of several churches, and he's telling Timothy how to conduct himself, how to deal with error, about order in the church, how to appoint leaders in the church. This is all in 1 Timothy. How to deal with rich people, how to deal with widows, how to deal with all sorts of different situations. 2 Timothy is really Paul's last letter, in which he says, look, I've run the race, I've fought the fight, I'm handing the baton on now. And he talks about the wonderful promises that there are to those who follow Christ right to the end. He also has some very touching personal elements where he talks about opposition he's suffered and just simple physical needs that he has. So it's got more personal details about what Paul is doing than almost any other letter. We don't know much about Timothy. We read about him in the book of Acts and how he had a Jewish mother and grandmother that's mentioned in 2 Timothy as well, and about how he was brought up knowing the scriptures, and that's the route he's followed to Christian leadership. Titus is a letter by Paul to Titus to tell him about how he can help with the churches in Crete, and the specific situations they're dealing with there, how they need to develop a system of having older people discipling younger people, men to men, women to women, and how Christ has done such amazing things in showing his magnanimity towards us. A lot of the language there is actually political language, which relates to how Christ has rescued us, is a greater deliverance than any political deliverance you could ever have.